Excerpt. The Farmhouse is a spooky tale about two young boys who go exploring in the countryside and come across an old, abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. Every summer, my mother would take me to visit our relatives who lived out in the country. My cousin and I were almost the same age, and we were always up to mischief. We spent our days out in the fields, exploring the area, making bows and arrows, sharpening knives, throwing rocks, climbing trees, and tracking wild animals. One day we set out on a long walk across the fields, not really having any idea where we were going. Sometimes we like to get ourselves lost and then try to find our way home. After a few hours of walking, it was getting late in the afternoon when we came across a farmhouse that looked as if it was abandoned. On the property, there was a small storage shed, so we jumped over the fence and decided to find out what was inside. We found that the doors were locked. There was a small keyhole, but we couldn't see through it because it was blocked by dust and thick spider webs. We walked towards the house and noticed that the front door was standing open, but there was no sign of life coming from within. The yard was overgrown with grass and weeds. The only sound we could hear was an old windmill nearby rattling in the breeze. I went to the door of the house and shouted, "Hello!" but there was no answer. It was then that the smell hit me. It was the stench of damp, mold, and decay. I stepped inside. There were clothes and papers everywhere, and some cardboard boxes. There was also an old bed, some racks of moth-eaten clothes, a leather armchair. I took a few steps forward, and the smell seemed to get worse. A feeling of intense uneasiness washed over me, and I wanted to turn and run away. Just then, something caught my eye. At the foot of the bed, between some boxes, lay a head. It was covered in gray hair. There was an old man lying on his back, his face turned upwards and his eyes open. He was dead. I let out a horrified yell, then grabbed my cousin by the arm, and we both ran as fast as we could. As we fled across the yard, we were passing the shed outside when the locked door suddenly crashed open and an old lady was standing there. Her hair was in disarray, and when she smiled, her lips parted, revealing a row of rotten teeth. She was carrying a bloody knife in her hand. She made an attempt to grab me as we rushed past, but I managed to dodge her and kept running. I didn't dare to look back. I just ran and ran as fast as I could. It was a few minutes later that I realized my cousin wasn't with me. I stopped in my tracks, breathing heavily, and looked around. He was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank. I started running again, desperately trying to get back to my aunt and uncle's house as quickly as possible. Eventually, I saw the lights of their house in the distance. As soon as I reached home, I ran inside and called out to my mother. My relatives gathered around me as I started babbling and begged them to go find my cousin. My uncle got into his truck and brought me with him. Eventually, we found the old farmhouse, but my cousin wasn't there. Neither were the old man or the old woman. After searching for a while, my uncle called the police. A few days later, my cousin still had not been found. The farm was searched from top to bottom, but there was no trace of him, and he remains missing to this day. It's one of the biggest unsolved mysteries in the region. I don't know what happened to my cousin that day, but I am glad it didn't happen to me. The Forest of Eternal Shadows. In a forgotten corner of the world, hidden by mist and guarded by ancient trees, lay the Forest of Eternal Shadows. It was a place of ancient power, where magic flowed as naturally as the wind through the leaves. In the heart of this forest lived a witch of unmatched power, known to the inhabitants of the nearby villages as Eliana, the guardian of shadows. Eliana was the last of an ancient lineage of witches who had ensured the balance between the natural world and the realm of the supernatural. Supernatural. Unlike stories that painted witches as malevolent beings, Eliana used her magic to protect the forest and those who dared to enter it, although she always kept a safe distance from outsiders. One night, under the full moon, a group of mercenaries, hired by a greedy lord, entered the forest with the aim of capturing Eliana. They believed that, using their magic, they could find an ancient treasure hidden deep in the forest. Despite the warnings of the villagers, who were well aware of the dangers that lurked among the trees, the mercenaries advanced, guided by greed. As they entered the forest, strange phenomena began to happen. Shadows moved among the trees, whispering warnings. Plants and roots changed places, turning the path into a living labyrinth. One by one, the mercenaries fell into magical traps until only their leader remained, a cruel and unscrupulous man. Eliana revealed herself before him, her figure wrapped in a cloak of shadows. With a firm voice, he warned him of the consequences of disturbing the peace of the forest. The leader, in an act of desperation, attacked the witch, triggering a duel of magic versus brute force. The battle was brief. Eliana, with her ancestral knowledge and the power of the forest in her favor, defeated the mercenary, locking him in a prison of roots, where he would be guarded by shadows until he understood the seriousness of his actions. After the confrontation, Eliana performed a ritual to purify the forest of the corruption that the intruders had brought. The shadows calmed, and the forest regained its peace. The grateful villagers continued to respect and fear the witch's power, knowing that as long as she was there, the forest of eternal shadows would be protected. Eliana became a legend, a reminder that in this world there are ancient forces that are not to be challenged. And so, the forest of eternal shadows remained a sanctuary of magic and mystery, guarded by the last of the witches. Voices in the fog. In the village of Elderwood, surrounded by a thick forest and perpetually shrouded in fog, a story was told that had been passed down from generation to generation. They said that, on nights when the fog became so dense that you could barely see a few meters away, voices could be heard whispering in the trees. These voices belonged to the apparitions of those who once inhabited the village and who, for unknown reasons, could not find eternal rest. Cecilia, a young teacher recently arrived in Elderwood, was intrigued by this legend from the first moment when he heard it. With an adventurous spirit and insatiable curiosity, she decided to enter the forest one night, guided by the light of her flashlight and the desire to discover the truth behind the whispers. As he advanced, the fog grew thicker, and the light of his flashlight barely managed to pierce the darkness. Then she began to hear them, voices that seemed to call to her, whispering words she couldn't fully understand. Cecilia followed the voices, feeling a mixture of fear and fascination. Suddenly, before her, ethereal figures appeared, barely visible through the fog. They were the apparitions of the former inhabitants of Elderwood, dressed in clothes from another era. Although Cecilia was startled at first, she soon realized that the apparitions had no intention of harming her. They seemed as lost and confused as she felt watching them. One of the apparitions, a kind-looking woman, came closer than the others. Through fragments of whispers, Cecilia understood that they were looking for someone who could listen to their stories, who could remember them, and in some way help them find the peace they longed for. Cecilia. He spent several hours in the forest, listening to the stories of the apparitions, lost loves, regrets, joys and sadness of a past life. At dawn, as the fog began to dissipate, the apparitions faded away one by one, leaving Cecilia alone in the forest, but with a feeling of calm and understanding. He returned to the village with a new mission. Cecilia began documenting all the stories she had heard, compiling her memories of the apparitions into a book. Over time, this book became a treasure for the inhabitants of Elderwood, a bridge between the past and the present, between the living and those spirits who still dwelt in the forest. The fog never stopped being a mystery in Elderwood, but for Cecilia and many others, it became a reminder that sometimes listening is the key to helping lost souls find their way to the light.